I have no doubt that reading bank statements has brought misfortune to many people. It's almost certainly a common thing, probably causing disasters far worse than mine. But it didn't help, not at all. I was just sorting through papers on my wife's desk at home, trying to find if she had paid her phone bill or something similar, completely normal and innocent. And then I found her. It lay under a stack of bills and other papers. The bank statement turned out to be from Barclays. I probably only noticed it because we use HSBC and the blue color on the headline caught my attention. I think she chose a different bank to hide it, which was quite ironic because it was the difference that made me take notice and scroll through the statement. I first checked the name at the top, and it said Jenny Matthews, so no surprise, but the address was unfamiliar to me, somewhere in West London, far south of Cambridge, where we lived. Then I checked the balance, £17,546, a decent amount, but where it came from I had no idea. Then I looked at the list of transactions for the last 3 months and was amazed at the regular large amounts of money that were coming into the account. £600 one day, over 1,000 a week later, then 800 just 6 days later, and so on. I make good money from my business and am used to large sums of money, but Jenny worked part-time for some PR company, sometimes in the evenings or rather on weekends, filling in for someone at some event. And even then she did it more for fun because the pay wasn't much. When I looked at the list of withdrawals, it really shocked me because every month there was the same amount withdrawn on a standing order, £567. This amount sounded eerily familiar. I walked over to her closet, an elegant antique roller top from the late 19th century, opened it, and took out my wife's bank file. Jenny was always very neat and organized, and I knew exactly where to look because we shared everything. We had no secrets from each other. Or at least they weren't until now. I found the HSBC statements and quickly scrolled through them until I found what I wanted, feeling no qualms about looking at her bank details as she regularly showed them to me. And here it is in black and white. Her salary from the agency is £567 every month. I was stunned, absolutely stunned. It turned out that Jenny paid herself a salary from her own bank account. Why the hell is she doing this? Does it even work? Where did this money come from in the first place? Should I have worried about this, and did it concern me? Damn it, of course it did. What was Jenny doing? I took the Barclays statement again and began to study it in more detail, realizing that virtually the only withdrawals were those monthly payments, while the receipts were erratic, frequent, but without any obvious pattern. Then it occurred to me that there was a lot more money going in than going out, and I looked again at the balance on the last page. Damn it, it wasn't £17,546. I missed a zero. It was £175,460. Damn it. My name is Jim Matthews. I'm 38 years old, and I admit that I'm happy with the way my life has turned out. I look quite decent fit, with thick brown hair, which has just begun to turn silver at the temples, adding solidity. I have my own computer business, small, but quite successful. 2 more people work with me, real professionals whom I can trust. We are not chasing excessive profits, but we are growing steadily, and I am proud of that. My wife, Jenny, is a real gem. She's 28, and to be honest, I've always thought 10 years apart was the ideal gap. She gives me her youth, energy, and that lightness that a person inevitably loses over the years. Jenny has stunning beauty. Her shiny blonde hair flows over her shoulders, her eyes shine like 2 stars, and her smile can warm even on the darkest days. I try to be for her what she deserves to see me, a mature, confident man who is ready to support her in everything. I share my life experience with her, protect her from unnecessary mistakes, and also create a comfortable lifestyle for us. Our cozy home is her kingdom, where she turned every room into a corner of warmth and harmony. Jenny and I give each other all our love, both spiritual and physical, without reserve. It even seems to me that over the 3 years of our marriage, this feeling has only deepened. We are still head over heels in love with each other, just like the day our eyes met for the first time. I remember it was a hot summer. We accidentally ran into each other at a conference, where she, as it turned out, was accompanying her friend. She stood in a bright sundress with a print of wildflowers, smiling slightly shyly, and did not immediately realize that I was talking to her. And I couldn't look away. 3 years have passed since then, but every time I look at her, I feel the same excitement as then. I found myself in London for work. One Google representative and I agreed on a promising deal, discussed the conditions, terms, and integration possibilities. The negotiations were tense, but quite productive. It all ended late in the evening, and remaining in the hotel lobby, I decided to have a glass of whiskey at the bar to relax a little and think about everything. The possible advantages of their proposal and different scenarios for the development of cooperation flashed through my head. But frankly speaking, my thoughts were already tired, confused, and I felt that I needed a change of scenery for at least a couple of hours. The hotel bar was quite stylish, soft twilight, elegant furniture, muffled conversations. I sat at a small table by the window, overlooking London at night. The city glowed with lights, as if reminding that life here never stops. My attention kept switching from the street to internal reflections, but when the bar door opened, everything around seemed to freeze. She came in. Jenny. Something exploded inside me. No, it didn't just explode, it turned upside down, and then fell back into place, only differently than before. I didn't even immediately understand why. She was not the dazzling woman who immediately attracted a crowd of glances. Rather, there was something subtle, sophisticated, alluring in her image that did not allow you to take your eyes off. Her figure, her light gait, the soft curve of her lips, and the calm confidence in her gaze, all this attracted me like a magnet. And it's not like I haven't met beautiful girls before. On the contrary, I had more than enough of them, and none of them stayed in my life for long. I always thought they wouldn't become more than just a nice hobby. But the second I saw Jenny, it seemed to me that someone completely different was standing in front of me. Not just another beauty who will be forgotten in a couple of weeks, but a woman with whom you want to find out what will happen next. There was some kind of challenge in her eyes, but not the kind that requires argument or competition, but the kind that calls you to be better. I suddenly realized, if I don't try to get to know her, this moment will forever remain with me like a missed chance. Jenny entered the bar with an ease that seemed to emphasize her confidence in herself and the world around her. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall, but the high heels of her shoes added a few more inches, making her look like a real queen of the evening. Her figure is slender, like a dancer's, with long, tanned legs that seem to go off into infinity. Those legs started with neat pumps that matched her look perfectly and disappeared under an ultra-short, deep emerald cocktail dress that accentuated every curve of her body. Her long, shiny dark hair flowed freely over her shoulders, framing her face in soft waves that immediately attracted the eye. Her deep brown eyes seemed almost hypnotic, as if they could read your every thought, and the slight curve of her upturned nose added charm, making her stand out from others. She was not a classic beauty in the usual sense of the word, but that didn't matter. There was something about her that was impossible to ignore. Every man in the bar seemed to turn his head involuntarily when she walked by. It was not only a look at a beautiful woman, but also a recognition of her uniqueness. She literally radiated everything at once: manners, elegance, confidence, fun, and sex. Moreover, each of these qualities manifested itself easily and naturally without the slightest pretense. Her energy filled the space, causing people to freeze, even if they couldn't understand why. She stopped at the entrance, looking around a little. This movement had everything: slight curiosity, confidence that she was welcome here, and that same sophisticated style that cannot be faked. Jenny nodded to the receptionist, the woman behind the counter who clearly knew her. This moment only added to the intrigue. She was probably a frequent visitor here, and her presence did not surprise anyone. But for me, sitting in my corner with a glass of whiskey, everything I saw was pure magic. And then she looked straight at me, and everything inside me did a somersault when her soft brown eyes melted all my doubts. I want her. I smiled back and nodded affably, wondering what to do next. But I didn't have to worry. Her smile, capable of lighting up the street outside, flashed across her face, and she walked towards me, her hips swaying slightly, emphasizing her figure, and her breasts quite ample, but not excessive, swaying in time with her steps, hinting that she might be under there's not much going on with this dress. "Hi, you must be James," she said to my surprise. "Jim, not James," I answered, perhaps in a slightly hoarse voice. "James, Jim, what's the difference?" She laughed, and I was not going to argue with her. "Can I sit down?" she asked in her understated, very British aristocratic, but surprisingly sweet accent. Of course," I blurted out, hastily standing up to pull out the chair for her. Even the way she sat radiated class, as if she had been specially taught this at some elite school for girls. I thought, why me? What have I done to deserve the attention of this dream on legs? And how does she know my name? "I'm Jenny," she said. "Sorry I'm late. I was detained. Thanks for waiting." Then she looked at me and asked, "Are you okay, Jim?" I was fine. I was just stunned. She later said with a laugh that I looked absolutely dumbfounded. However, I quickly recovered, and within a couple of minutes we were talking with ease and pleasure, surprised to discover that we had so much in common. The same music, tennis, Indian cuisine, and also, oddly enough, rugby. Jenny was an educated woman who could talk about a wide variety of topics, which made her very different from the half-bimbo I had been dating lately. Then her cell phone rang, and she apologized and answered it. I heard her say, "No, I'm here. No, he's here too. It can't be. He's with me now. Oh, God. Wait a minute." She looked at me in surprise. A smile began to play on her beautiful features again, and I continued to watch silently. "You weren't waiting for me by any chance?" she asked. "No." "But I'm very glad you came," I replied with slight impudence. "You're not James Green, right?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "No, I'm Jim Matthews." "Damn," she said and giggled, bringing the cell phone to her lips. "Miss," she said into the phone. I was late and mixed up the Jemises. Well, or the Jims. Her curse words combined with her aristocratic accent sounded unusual, but natural. She turned her head slightly, covering her mouth with her hand so that I would not hear further remarks, but I already knew that I was about to lose her. He frantically tried to come up with something witty to hold her back as soon as she finished the conversation. But Jenny looked at me again, still holding the phone, and a smile appeared on her face, almost turning into a grin. "No, he's pretty cute," she said into the phone, looking intently at me so that I could hear her words. "Quite attractive in that slightly rough style." I think I blushed a little. "Okay, give him my apologies. Maybe next time he's in the UK," she said, ending the call and putting her mobile phone in her bag. "Well," she said, "it looks like I missed my meeting. But it's okay, it can wait." The smile never left her face. "If you are free this evening, what would you like to do? Maybe we can do this together." I restrained myself from telling her what exactly I wanted to do first and suggested dinner. She readily agreed, and that's exactly what we did. It was the best dinner of my life, although I barely noticed what we were eating. I was already under her spell. Jenny told me about her work in PR, how she organizes meetings, organizes private events, helps her agency bring people together at the right time and in the right places. She obviously liked it, and even then I hoped that she could love me just as much. After dinner, I walked her to the taxi stand, immensely glad that there was a short line there. This gave me a little more time to talk to her and finally hug her. I put my arm around her, and she pressed herself close to me, sliding her arm around my waist and nestling comfortably next to me. I kissed her lightly on the cheek, and she responded in kind. Her scent alone drove me crazy. She then looked around, maneuvering herself to get between me and the others in line, and raised her arms and wrapped them around my neck, pulling me towards her until our lips met. Paradise. It was just a light touch, but for me it was an opening to the world of milk and honey, and I held the honey in my hands. I lost control and almost embarrassed myself by kissing her more hungrily, running my hands along her back, feeling the gentle curves down to her hips. "Hey, easy, easy," she exclaimed, and then laughed. "Give the girl a chance. We just met." I retreated, disappointed, but not completely. There was frustration, but I didn't feel it. This girl was special, and she was worth the effort. Well worth the wait. Sorry, I apologized. I just got carried away, and she laughed charmingly again. Take your time, she said. Kiss me slowly. It's worth it in the long run. Damn, I was lost. And I think that's when I fell in love with Jenny, my future wife. This was the end of our first casual evening. I suggested we go back to my hotel for a nightcap, but she declined, teasing me that I expected more and it was too early for a first date. Can I see you again? I asked, and she teased me again, pretending to wonder if it was worth her time. All this time she held my hand, pressing her beautiful, slender body against me and driving me crazy with desire. Okay, she finally conceded, shrugging her graceful shoulders. I'll call you. What's your number? I don't believe you, I said quite boldly. Better give me yours, and I'll call you. Impossible, Jim, Jenny answered quietly. I never give out my number, especially to nice strangers, but I'll call you. We compromised and agreed to meet on Tuesday. It was too long for me, but this was the first day she could. What was I going to do with this new knowledge about her finances? Why did she have all this money, and where did it come from? Of course, her parents were rich. They owned an estate in Kent, hunted and shot pheasants, and owned a large part of one of the small investment banks, the one who survived the Big Bang of the financial world, so the family was undoubtedly influential. There was no reason why my wife couldn't have that kind of money, even in those amounts. But where did they come from, and why in strange, if not dubious, translations? It must have had something to do with her work at a PR agency. But to tell you the truth, I didn't have the slightest idea. All I had to do was ask her. But I couldn't. If she kept it from me, then she had a reason. And I had to find out what that reason was, no matter the cost. I have to admit, it scared me a little. Although it seemed impossible, I began to suspect that Jenny was involved in some shady dealings. I needed to travel to London in a few days and decided to check the address on my bank statement. It was an upscale neighborhood that smelled of money, old money, exactly the kind of place where Jenny's family would feel at home. This calmed me down a little. I looked at the brass signs on the door, but none of them told me anything. Only two caught my attention: Corporate Agency and Golden Circle Agency. The rest appeared to be lawyers or brokers. I waited for a while, but no one came or came out. It was no use. I reached a dead end and didn't know how to move on. All I could do was talk to her directly, but I didn't like that idea at all. She was hiding something, and maybe her family was involved. I had to figure out what, and perhaps more importantly, why. Our second date was a real revelation for me, and I still remember that day to the smallest detail. Not just what we talked about or how we laughed, but even what she was wearing. It's amazing how clothes can capture a moment in memory. Jenny chose skinny jeans that perfectly hugged her slender legs, emphasizing their grace, and a simple white sweater. On any other woman, this outfit would look simply stylish, but on Jenny, it looked as if it was created especially for her, with her sophisticated grace in mind. I caught a glimpse of the Pierre Cardin label as she leaned over to adjust her sleeve, and thought that such things could really enhance natural beauty. But then something else occurred to me. It wasn't the sweater or the jeans that made her look so perfect. It was herself, her lightness, natural confidence, and that inner spark that makes you look at her as if enchanted. I'm sure it's women like Jenny who inspire designers. Perhaps, in one of the fashion shows, in the drawings of the first sketches, the designer imagined exactly her. It was as if she was a muse for those who create beauty. At that moment I thought, is it really for the sake of women like her that entire flotillas were once equipped, setting off on long voyages to conquer new lands? Was it really because of people like her that cities fell to invaders? And I realized that the answer is most likely yes. Our second date ended as brightly as it began. We went to the theater, elegant and stately, with the crackling atmosphere of ancient art that came to life on stage. The performance was wonderful, although, I must admit, I could hardly concentrate on what was happening. My whole world that evening revolved around Jenny. I watched her reaction out of the corner of my eye, how she laughed quietly at the right moments, lightly covering her mouth with her hand, how intensely she peered into the scene during dramatic episodes. Her emotions were sincere, alive, and I was amazed at how she knew how to enjoy the moment. After the theater, we went for a late dinner at one of those fine restaurants that London hides in cozy streets decorated with lights. The tables stood close to each other, the candles on the tables flickered with a soft light, and the quiet sounds of a piano could be heard from afar. I still can't remember what we ate. Food was secondary. Much more important were her words, her smile, her gaze, with which she seemed to look straight into the soul. After dinner, we went outside, and the air was cool, fresh, with a slight smell of water. We went for a walk along the Thames. London shone with lights. The bridges reflected in the dark water created the impression of a fairy tale city. We walked hand in hand, taking our time, not talking too much. It was that same silence that does not require words, because everything that is needed is already clear. I felt her fingers lightly squeeze my hand, and this small gesture seemed to be something much more than just a touch. Naturally, at the end of the evening, I assumed that she would go with me to the hotel. It was almost a given. The evening was perfect, the chemistry between us was sparkling, and everything seemed to be leading exactly to this. Jenny went. We went into the hotel, and I offered to come up to my room. She agreed. My heart skipped a beat joyfully, but I tried not to show my thoughts. In the room, comfortably lit with dim lighting, I offered her a glass of wine. She took it, slowly took a sip, and looked at me. Her eyes at that moment were incredibly deep, soulful. She seemed to know what I was thinking. Of course, I assumed that it would all end with her ending up in my bed. I was sure that this was a natural extension of our evening. But Jenny, with the same ease and confidence that was always inherent in her, made it clear that this would not happen. She simply said no softly, but definitely. It wasn't her words that mattered, but how she did it. No judgment, no games, no falsehood. Her refusal was as elegant as she was. She didn't explain the reasons, and I didn't ask. This moment unexpectedly changed my perception. Instead of disappointment, I felt something else, respect and even more interest. She wasn't predictable. She wasn't one to follow patterns, and this made her even more unique. It's not that we didn't enjoy the evening. We were enjoying ourselves, but suddenly she stopped. Just like that, as if realizing where everything was going. "No, please don't," she whispered, grabbing my hand but not removing it. "I'm not ready. Not yet. Please don't." This was perhaps the most difficult decision I had to make in my life at that time. I stopped, pulled away, but left my hand in that place, barely touching her body, not daring to lower it lower, even though her jeans still hid everything underneath. She made no attempt to stop me, almost as if she was daring me to disobey her. But there was a plea in her eyes that I should not do this. The moment passed, and we clung to each other again, hugging, kissing, and holding each other tightly. Damn it, we're adults. I'm over 30, she's over 20. But she wasn't ready. Not yet. I asked what was the matter, if there was a problem at all. She nodded, whispered yes, and then burst into tears. What can you do? If you love a woman, and by that time I already loved her without a doubt, then you accept her. I hugged her tightly, stroked her hair, and gently told her that everything was okay. We lay like this, and my ardor slowly faded away, leaving only the feeling of love for her. After a good hour, she sighed heavily, stood up, apologized, and tears appeared on her cheeks again. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm in such a mess, such a terrible mess, you can't even imagine. You can't imagine it at all." I held her to me as tightly as I could so that all her problems would disappear, and in the end, at least for a while, they really did disappear. "Thank you, Jim," she finally said. "You are the most wonderful man." She kissed me, and everything suddenly seemed right. We sat for a while, hugging, but this could not last forever, and I again walked her to the taxi. It was 1 in the morning and still no sex, but I had never felt so damn happy in my life. I was wondering if I should ask Jenny where all this money came from and why she was managing it. At best, it could have something to do with her family, maybe some cash they were hiding from the IRS. I liked this version for a while, but it seemed too simple, too convenient, and I knew there was something more behind it. I had no other explanation, none at all, just a growing knot in my stomach, a premonition that everything was not as it seemed, and that a big shock was in store for me, although even then I could not imagine how big. I followed her to London one evening as she went to one of her meetings for a PR agency, keeping a careful distance to see if she was actually heading to the hotel where the meeting had been arranged or about to meet someone suspicious. But no, here she arrives at the right hotel, so correctly, elegantly gets out of the car and hands the keys to the valet. Nothing suspicious, and a few hours wasted. What a fool I felt. I decided to just ask her. The explanation will probably be simple. I will ask her the question that same night as soon as she returns, no matter how late it is. But she did not return that night and woke me up in the morning with a call that woke me up from a heavy sleep on the sofa, where I spent the night waiting for her return. "Hello, Jim," she sang cheerfully, as cheerful as a lark. "Sorry, we got so caught up in our discussion last night that the company decided to pay for my hotel room. Everything went great. I'll be back before lunch. How about lunch at Beulah? I'll tell you everything." "Why didn't you call me yesterday?" I asked, full of anxiety. "I called," she replied with concern, "but you didn't answer. I left a message." I looked down and saw that the message light was indeed blinking. She must have called while I was on my way back from London, and I didn't notice when I returned, preoccupied with my thoughts. I agreed to meet her at the Beulah, but was still puzzled. I felt the world shrinking around me. I didn't know what to do or what else to say. The next week, I followed her again, feeling like a traitor, hating myself for the mistrust that had settled in my soul and the thoughts that had entered my mind. Our third date turned out to be decisive for me, and I was looking forward to it with such impatience that I surprised myself. At 38 years old, I was used to being confident and in control of my emotions, but before this evening, I felt almost like a teenager. I wanted everything to go perfectly, not only because I hoped to finally see Jenny in my bed, but most of all because I wanted to make her happy, to show her how much I appreciated her. The only thing I was afraid of was that the shadow of tension that hung in the air on our last date would not arise between us. We agreed to meet on neutral territory between London and Cambridge. I chose a small inn that I discovered a few months ago during one of my trips. It was a place that immediately evoked a cozy feeling. Ancient wooden beams, the smell of fresh bread, and a warm fireplace, dim lights, and friendly staff. When Ginny walked in, everything seemed brighter. She was relaxed, smiling, as if she had left all her worries behind for the evening. Her presence instantly filled the room, and I noticed how several pairs of eyes involuntarily turned to her, but I didn't care. She walked towards me, and at that moment the whole world narrowed from me to her alone. From the very beginning, everything went as I could only dream of. Jenny was relaxed, her laugh sounded sincere, and her eyes, those same brown eyes that could drive me crazy, were shining with joy. We talked about everything and nothing, discussed random topics, shared stories, and every gesture, every word seemed perfect to me. After dinner, which was so pleasant that I barely remembered what we ate, she leaned slightly towards me. Her hair softly touched my face, and she whispered, "Do they have numbers here, Jim?" For a second I froze, not believing my ears. These were the very words that I had been waiting for, not even daring to hope that they would come out. My heart began to pound, and I nodded, trying to maintain the appearance of calm, although inside I was ready to scream. Yes, yes, sure. It seemed that my prayers had been answered, and this evening would be the start of something even greater between us. When we went upstairs, the inn seemed even more cozy. The wooden floors creaked slightly, creating an atmosphere of privacy, and the room was lit by soft lamplight, casting warm shadows on the walls. Jenny turned to me with that same smile that made everything inside me turn over. At that moment, I realized that her agreement to be here with me was not just a gesture. It was the beginning of something real, deep, and perhaps the most important thing in my life. It's hard to describe how wonderful that night was, but I'll try. I had not been innocent for a long, long time, but it seemed that I had found such a rarity and innocent girl, and such a beautiful one, already in her 20s. We lay in silence in each other's arms, enjoying the closeness and feeling of unity, both content and peaceful. "Thank you, Jim," Jenny whispered, snuggling into my chest. "Thank you, my love." I kissed her and told her how much I loved her. "I needed this, Jim," she said after a few minutes. "I wanted this for so long, and I'm just happy it was you." The second attempt to follow Jenny turned out to be even easier. I knew the hotel where her meeting was scheduled, and I gave her a little lead, arriving there about half an hour after her. I already doubted that I even understood what I was doing here and why I needed it. I made my way into the foyer, terrified that she might notice me, with no idea how I would explain my presence. Of course, she wasn't there. Why would she be there? I went to the bar, looked inside, already deciding that this was all stupid and childish, and that I would immediately leave if she wasn't there. But Jenny was there, in the bar, talking to some man. She was sitting with her back to me, but I recognized her immediately, and the man she was talking to looked American, much older than Jenny, perhaps over 50, expensively dressed and impeccably groomed. The tension began to leave me when I realized that everything was fine. He was as he should have been, a wealthy client of the agency, obviously a businessman with whom she was discussing some business. I felt like a fool, cursing myself for suspecting Jenny of anything. But at least, my main fear turned out to be in vain. She did not cheat on me. Perhaps this man had something to do with the money she was hiding, but I was far from Sherlock Holmes and did not know how to move forward. "Just come home," I thought. "Stop being so stupid." But then Jenny stood up, and everything inside me sank. She looked amazing, so sexy, in a tight black minidress that barely covered her butt, leaving her long, slender legs completely exposed. It fit her body so tightly that even from afar it was clear that she was not wearing a bra. That knot in my stomach became even stronger, but it wasn't just because of her stunning appearance. I had never seen this dress before, and it was certainly not the sharp gray suit that Jenny had left home in just a few hours ago. My mind raced between attempts to justify her. Why doesn't she change her clothes for the evening meeting? Why shouldn't she look sexy to impress an important client? Then she laughed at something the man said and smiled at him with our smile, the one that could light up the street. The smile that I always thought she kept just for me. Even worse, she put her hand on his chest, playfully and flirtatiously, which did not fit in with the image of business communication. Thoughts were racing in my head. Maybe this is a friend of her father, some old family acquaintance, like an uncle. But I was grasping at straws, and when Jenny reached up on her tiptoes to kiss him on the cheek, my world began to crumble. It got even worse when he leaned down and kissed her back, not on the cheek, but right on the lips. And this kiss lasted longer than any that could have been between uncle and niece. Bastard. Bastard. This damn bastard. I'll kill him. But I just stood there and watched as Jenny continued to flirt with him, clinging to him while he hugged her. She smiled at him the way she often smiled at me. The world collapsed in an instant. I stood rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to believe what I was seeing. Something was bursting in my chest, as if the air had suddenly become thick and viscous, as if my lungs were refusing to work. But even despite this suffocating heaviness, I could not take my eyes off the scene playing out before me. Jenny, my Jenny. She stood a few meters from me, but seemed so infinitely far away. In the light of the street lamps, her face was illuminated with joy, but this joy did not belong to me. She looked at the other, the tall man, with a confidence that bordered on impudence. He held her by the waist, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, and she let him. I saw him lean closer, their lips meeting. At first, it was a light kiss, almost fleeting, but then it became different, more profound, more passionate. Their closeness was undeniable, and it tore me up inside. My heart sank as if an invisible hand was squeezing it. Something was screaming inside, but outside I was motionless, like a statue. I couldn't figure out what hurt more, the very fact of her betrayal or how happy she looked. Her eyes shone with that same sparkle that I loved so much. She laughed at his jokes the way she once laughed at mine, and there was no falsehood or pretense in this. Jenny was genuinely happy, but not with me. This realization struck me like lightning time after time. I felt my palms sweat and the cold air of the night begin to burn my skin. I needed air. An escape was needed. I had to leave, hide, but my legs wouldn't obey. I stood as if chained. Thoughts were spinning in my head. Why? What went wrong? How could this happen? But there were no answers. Only pain, cold and merciless. "How can I help you, sir?" I turned around, and there was a uniformed employee standing in front of me, questioning my right to be here, questioning my right to see my beloved wife flirt with some damn stranger. "Back off," I shouted too loudly. After that, everything got out of control. He called for help, and 3 employees pulled me out the back door as I watched Jenny leave with the man, laughing at his probably stupid jokes, running her hand affectionately down his back. In response, he calmly hugged her waist, sometimes stroking her thigh. I ended up in an alley, a little scratched, but no serious injuries. Returning to the front entrance, I still decided to rush inside to meet her face to face and find out what was happening. But the guards caught me again and threw me out the door, threatening that next time they would be less polite if I didn't leave. My pleas that my wife was inside with another man did not convince anyone. I wandered outside, looking up at the windows in vain, wondering which ones they were hiding behind. The thought of what that bastard was doing to my Jenny, my dear Jenny, tore me apart. What connected her to him? What does money have to do with this? To hell with money. It didn't matter anymore. My wife Jenny was out there somewhere, making love to that bastard, and I was completely powerless to do anything. After that fateful third date, our lives seemed to go into a fairy tale. I felt like a teenager experiencing love for the first time, the kind that makes your blood boil and your heart beat as if it were about to jump out of your chest. This feeling never left me. In the morning, I woke up thinking about Jenny, and in the evening, I fell asleep remembering her smile. Every conversation we had, every meeting only strengthened my confidence. I had found the very woman for whom I was ready to do anything. Jenny seemed to feel the same way. She glowed with happiness, and this made her even more beautiful. One day, a couple of months later, she invited me to dinner at her parents' house. This was an important step, and I knew that meeting her family would be another milestone in our relationship. Her parents lived in a luxurious house outside the city, surrounded by an immaculate garden that looked as if every tree and bush had been carefully cultivated under the personal supervision of the best gardeners. Her father, a man with a heavy but good-natured look, turned out to be unexpectedly friendly. He listened intently to my business stories and seemed pleased that his daughter had chosen a man who stood on his own 2 feet. Her mother was a typical society lady, elegant and a little arrogant, but even she seemed fascinated by the way I looked at Jenny. They seemed genuinely happy that their daughter had finally found someone who had won her heart. 6 months after that, we got married. The wedding was grand. It was a holiday that could be the subject of a glossy magazine. Her wealthy parents covered all the expenses, and it was obvious that they were determined to make this day perfect. From the venue to the smallest details of the decor, everything looked like it had been carefully planned for several years. Silk bows, floral arrangements of roses and orchids, music from a live orchestra invited especially for us. I stood at the altar, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, waiting for Jenny. When she appeared, my breath caught. Her dress was created as if especially for her light, elegant, it emphasized her sophisticated figure. At that moment, she looked like a princess from a fairy tale, only it was my fairy tale. We said our vows to each other, and I felt my heart swell with happiness when she said her "I do." Everything was perfect, but I didn't care. Glitter, wealth, smiles of guests, all this was secondary. The only thing that mattered was her. Jenny, who was now my wife, my companion, my future. I tried to ask Jenny if she had any traumatic experiences in the past, why she remained innocent in her 20s, but she did not want to discuss it, promising to tell everything one day. We were so happy, so in love, that it didn't seem to matter. The first 6 months were blissful. Of course, if you didn't work for me, because then it seemed that it was impossible to come to an agreement with me. But no one cared. Everyone was happy for me, even my competitors. They seemed so moved that they did not take advantage of the situation. Why, it hit me hard when we lost a major client and I had to focus on my work again. But that didn't mean I neglected Jenny. Although she probably still felt the changes, she became a little depressed and seemed to have lost her former spirit. "What happened, love?" I asked for the 10th time, not really expecting an intelligible answer. She looked at me, sighed, and finally admitted. "I'm a little bored," she said. "Not with you, not at all. You're wonderful." I smiled when I heard these words, even though our intimate life had noticeably diminished in recent months. I need something to do to get interested, to keep my brain working. Maybe I could do some work for my old agency. She stopped working there shortly after our wedding and seemed content, but now it became clear that something was missing in her life. "Do you think they'll take you back? Have you asked them yet?" I suggested, thinking this might be a good idea. Jenny smiled. It was that same smile, and I realized that she had already decided everything, and that I had no arguments even if I could come up with them. "They've called me every month since we got married. They desperately want me to come back," she said. I kind of hinted that I could come back and work a little, only part-time. Everything was decided. The following week, she went to London to meet them and started a few days later doing some afternoon meetings for them. That night, she returned home smiling from ear to ear, happier than ever. She had a great day and everything was back to normal. Order returned to the Matthews house. I had nothing to complain about. Jenny had gained a zest for life and energy for sex. Even more than before, although I wouldn't have thought that was possible. In the past, Jenny had always preferred straight-up sex, which I chalked up to her lack of experience. She nervously avoided anything unusual. But from that moment she became relaxed, absolutely ready for any experiments. I didn't understand what I had done to deserve this unprecedented pleasure, but I didn't think about it and just enjoyed it. The next 2 years were incredible. The previous problems disappeared. We spent every free moment together, and I missed it when she went away for the evening, and even more when she was gone for the whole weekend in Paris, New York, or somewhere else. But her job mostly required travel to London, and I tried to find an excuse to meet her there for lunch before she left for an event in the evening. And then I found that bank statement and everything changed. I couldn't believe she was cheating on me, but the proof was in front of me. I saw it. I saw her kissing and hugging her lover in the hotel. I saw his hand sliding along her thigh. How could she do this? How could she betray me? What was special about this American? What did he have that I didn't? More money? Best sex? Hell, he was 20 years older than me, 30 years older than her. It might have been one of her coworkers, but he looked wealthy, so maybe it was her boss. I vaguely remembered her saying that one of the directors was American. But no matter how close the relationship they have at work, their bosses are not allowed to do this, unless there is something between them. My mind raced in circles until I felt like I was about to burst into tears. Maybe this has been going on for a long time. Maybe that's why she was so eager to go back to work. Maybe, oh my gosh, I no longer knew what to think. It was Thursday, the morning after I was kicked out of the hotel. I couldn't stand it anymore. I heard Jenny arrive home late at night and wondered how many times she had come home so late, being with him while I slept soundly. Some time passed before she went up to the bedroom. Even in the dark, I noticed that she had already changed into her nightgown, perhaps taking a shower in the guest bedroom so that I wouldn't smell her lover. I was seething with anger, but was determined to wait until morning. If I was going to kick her out, then so be it, but if I had to leave myself, the early hours weren't very welcoming. I still hoped that she would have an explanation, and that in the morning she would laugh about it and tell me about the idiot who tried to seduce her. She pressed herself against my back, but I pretended to be asleep, not reacting, even when she hugged me and kissed my neck. I doubted we'd ever sleep together again, let alone make love. With relief for myself and probably for her too. I felt her finally retreat. She didn't have to pretend anymore. The next morning, I was dressed and ready long before she was up. But that's not surprising. I didn't have as energetic a night as she probably did. "Hey, darling," she called, running cheerfully into the living room, her charm almost making me reconsider my plans. "How are you this morning?" I didn't answer. I just sat there motionless, my heart beating wildly, and she looked around, and the cup in her hand fell back onto the table with a crash. "What happened to you?" she screamed. Her concern could almost be sincere. The marks on my face after I was thrown out of the hotel for the second time obviously came as a surprise to her. Jenny rushed towards me, but I raised my hand to stop her. Perhaps it was not only my gesture, but also the expression on my face. "What happened, Jim? What happened?" she asked insistently. "I got thrown out of the bar last night," I snapped. I didn't get the reaction I expected, but I should have seen it coming. "What? You? Kicked out of the bar?" she screamed in an almost caricatured English accent. "You stupid, what did you do? Are you drunk?" She looked at me and smiled, almost laughing, imagining me, a pillar of respect, being kicked out of the pub drunk. I hope it wasn't Bull, Jim. We were going there tomorrow evening. The smile on her face faded when she realized that I was not smiling back at her. Now I began to enjoy this conversation a little, hoping to make her suffer at least a little for what she had done to me. "What happened, Jim?" she asked simply. "Sit down," I said. "You may need this." I waited a few moments, enjoying the tension on her face. She knew something was wrong, but she had no idea what it was. Now the situation has changed, and the initiative was in my hands. It wasn't a pub where I was kicked out, it was a bar. Hotel bar. Hotel bar. What hotel? Somewhere in Cambridge? She asked, not understanding where this conversation was going. Not in Cambridge. In London. In the center, somewhere around Knightsbridge. I saw her lips twitch, just a little, but the mention of Knightsbridge shocked her. That's where she spent the night. "What hotel?" she asked, but had already lowered her gaze. I think she knew what was about to happen. "Grand Central," I answered calmly. "It's not far from the square. Perhaps you know him, Jenny. Maybe you were there?" "Recently, for example." Jenny ran her hand over her forehead and then looked up, trying to force herself to smile. She didn't know how much I knew. Damn it, I didn't even know how much I knew. "Yes, I was there last night." "I was working," she whispered, and then spoke louder, more confidently. "Damn it, Jim, you knew I was going there." "I told you. I always tell you where I'm going." "What does it all mean?" "It's about who you were with," I answered, still calm, outwardly, if not internally. She looked me straight in the eye, not knowing what to say. "A client, just a client," Jenny finally said, but her voice was shaking. I think she already knew that she had lost. "Do all your clients touch your ass? Do they all act like you belong to them? Do they all kiss you like you're their lover?" I blurted out, losing control. Jenny looked at me and her face changed. Then she burst into tears. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was heartbreak. Our broken heart. You see, I still loved her. I resisted the temptation to rush to her, hug her, and tell her everything was okay so she wouldn't worry. It was already too late for that. I waited because I wasn't going to say the next words. What she said next could change something. After some time, she raised her eyes and, still sobbing, said, "I love you, Jim." And she burst into tears again, grief shaking her whole body. I waited again for her to calm down. Again, I waited for her to speak first. "What did you see, Jim?" she asked timidly. "I'll tell you what I saw, you trash. I saw you smiling at him and kissing him. Saw you rubbing his back and him grabbing your ass, and you didn't seem to mind at all. I saw the two of you walking away holding hands towards the stairs. This is what I saw. I think you were going to his room. Am I right?" Jenny looked at me sadly, sadder than I had ever seen her. She opened her mouth to deny it, but stayed silent, knowing it was pointless. Then she nodded, just slightly, confirming my worst fears. There was absolute despair in her eyes. "I think you had sex all night, and then you had the nerve to come back here smelling like him." "It's not true," she shouted back. "I didn't come back like this. I took a shower before leaving the hotel. I would never do this to you, I swear." I was no longer sure what her vows were worth, but I continued. "Then why did you change in the other room? Why didn't I undress in our bedroom like usual? I didn't want to wake you." "If you were asleep, I didn't want to disturb you," she answered immediately, with some sincerity in her voice, but this could hardly serve as an excuse. "And why is this?" I finally asked. "Because you didn't want me to know how late you came back." "Maybe," Jenny whispered barely audibly after a few moments. "And this is probably not the first time, right?" I threw back at her, and her silence confirmed my guess. "What should we do now, Jenny?" I asked after another long pause. The only sound was her sobs as she tried to pull herself together. I didn't enjoy it at all, although I thought I would enjoy the moment. "I don't know, Jim, but I love you, only you. You are the only one for me," she said. "Oh yes, Jenny, I'm your only one, but you're making love to another man behind my back. This is really convincing. I believe in this, of course. It was just sex. We didn't make love. It wasn't love. It was just sex. Funny, exciting, but just sex," she said. "Does that make a difference?" I asked. She nodded. "Yes, this is a big difference. Please, Jim, understand. This is really important." I was in no mood to understand any differences and could hardly contain my anger. "This is your lover," I continued. "Who is he? How long does this last?" "He's not my lover," I said. "No. It's not what you think, Jim, honestly. There is nothing between us, please believe me. This." "Shut up, you stupid fool," I interrupted her. "Stop making things worse. Stop lying to me. Do you think I'm an idiot? Tell me now, how long have you been sleeping with him? Is it weeks, months, or maybe years?" "I just met him last night," Jenny said suddenly, with surprising calm, although tears continued to stream down her cheeks. "I met him at the hotel, probably only 5 or 10 minutes before you saw us." "Oh, of course, and I have to believe it, right? I assume he bought you a glass of wine and got you drunk. Took advantage of you, poor girl." "No, it wasn't like that at all, Jim," she answered, barely audible. "As I said, I worked. He paid me to have sex with him." "Jenny." "Hello? I think you all think I'm terrible, and I can't blame you. Jim was heartbroken when I told him that the man at the hotel had paid me for sex and that I was a call girl. I tried to explain that I was different, that I worked as an escort, but who was I kidding? I couldn't even deceive myself anymore. He called me cheap, and it really hurt me. I burst into tears. For some reason, I can't stand this word, and I can't consider myself like that. Perhaps this is just a play on words, but it allowed me to live with myself." "How about cheap?" "No, I definitely wasn't cheap, not by any stretch of the imagination. My clients were rich people. They had to be so in order to afford my services, and the commission of my agency, Golden Circle. Among them were politicians, athletes, top managers, as they were called in the press. Different people from different countries of the world. Like the other girls, I had regular clients once a month or so. Some I knew for years, and a couple I knew before I even met Jim, although I prayed he would never find out. Among them were British, Americans, Canadians, French, a truly international audience. I usually met them when they came to London on business, but they often invited me for weekends, and even for weeks before they got married. It always cost them a lot of money, several thousand, but I think I lived up to their expectations. When I was with them, I became their girlfriend, lover, caring, and attentive. For my clients, I was probably the ideal friend, available on call, ready to fulfill almost any of their desires, but not intrusive when they didn't want it. I never took money from them personally. Everything went through the Golden Circle, and they were already transferring my share to my secret account. But since I got married, the money began to flow into a separate secret account that I never even touched. To be honest, it has not been a question of money for me for a long time. The only exception was my salaries, which were transferred to our joint account so that Jim could see them and not suspect anything. Then he found that damn statement. The man I loved so much discovered this, and my world fell apart. I didn't stop crying for a week, and my eyes were red from grief. Jim left the house crying like a child. I couldn't believe I could hurt him so much. It was stupid to think that I could hide this forever. I didn't know where he went, where he lives now. Despite my calls, he refused to talk to me or even listen to me. I was desperate, almost on the edge, and although I knew how much I had hurt him, I also knew that he loved me, or at least loved me before. I couldn't understand how he could end everything between us so abruptly. I completely distanced myself from everyone. I have no friends left. I suddenly realized that my lifestyle had given me many so-called friends, but not one I could confide in, not one to whom I could pour out my heart. There was, of course, one person, but he didn't want to talk to me, and who could blame him? I refused several orders, telling clients that I was not feeling well. My voice must have sounded terrible, and I think they believed me. Besides, I really wasn't able to accept men. But to my shame, even then I did not think about breaking with this way of life forever. I hope it was just because I couldn't think clearly at the time. About 10 days passed without any contact. Even Sarah in Jim's office politely declined my requests to connect me with him. Then I decided to go there myself. By that point, I had stopped crying all the time, and my eyes had returned to normal a little, but despite the makeup, I still looked terrible. Although I always considered myself quite pretty, I knew that I was not naturally beautiful like some girls. But I knew how to present myself. I learned to make the best of what I have. I had a good body, and I knew how to stand, how to walk, how to hold myself. I learned this from the best teachers in the world at my Swiss school. I learned to laugh at men's jokes and have conversations on topics that interested them. I had a dazzling smile. It was innate, a gift of nature. I was used to being noticed when I walked into a room, and I liked it. I even expected it. But that day, no one paid attention to me. Nobody. "Christ, Jenny, you look terrible," Sarah said as I walked up to her desk. We had become quite close over the past few years, but she was usually the picture of reserve, so my appearance must have really startled her. "Sorry, Jim's not here." "When will he return?" I asked, barely holding back another bout of tears. Sarah looked at me with pity, stood up, and gently took my hand. "Let's go," she said. "It's time for me to take a break. Let's have coffee somewhere." Over coffee, although I was drinking tea, she told me that Jim saw my car pull into the parking lot and went out the back door while I was going in through the front. He told her that we had a big fight, but didn't explain why, which made me breathe a sigh of relief. "He doesn't want to discuss it," she said. "He's in terrible condition. Do you want to tell me what's wrong?" "I can't," I answered. "But it's my fault, not his." "It's so bad, isn't it?" Sarah commented with a knowing look. "Worse," I answered. "Much worse. I think you should find someone you can talk to about this," she suggested. "Someone close to you, whom you trust." It was good advice, but I didn't have anyone. I was close to my parents, my only child, but how to start such a conversation? "I haven't mentioned this before, Daddy, but I've been working as a prostitute since leaving Oxford, and my husband has just found out about it." No, it's simply impossible. I had no one, and I would have to cope on my own. But everything turned out differently. The agency kept calling me, and eventually I had to admit what happened. What my husband found out. "Oh God," they said, but that was all. They least of all wanted to interfere in family disagreements. A week later, Rolf called. Rolf was one of my American clients. He was almost 60, but he was in great shape, a good lover, and I knew him before I met Jim. We got along very well, and I suppose I had some pretty deep feelings for him, although nothing quite like what I felt for Jim. In any case, he was married, and once I even dated his wife, although, of course, I was introduced as a junior business partner. Rolf was one of only 2 clients I ever gave my phone number to. I felt that I could trust him. "Sorry, Rolf," I said when I heard his voice. "I'm unavailable right now, perhaps for a long time." "The Golden Circle told me about your trouble," he said, and I burst into tears. You need someone to talk to, right? Rolf continued. Let's meet somewhere. Maybe I can help. Oh, Rolf, please, no, don't invite me. I am not able to give you what you want. Time to pay back, he said quietly. It's time for me to do something for you, not the other way around. I promise, nothing unnecessary. Let's meet at the usual place. No, not there. I'll come to Cambridge. Where do you offer? 5 hours later, I was sitting opposite Rolf, and he started questioning me. Do you want him to come back? He asked first, to which I replied that, of course, I want to, but there is little chance. If not, then I'd be more than happy. Well, Polly and I haven't been getting along for a long time, and I thought. I interrupted him. Please, Rolf, don't lead me down this path. I like you, okay? In a way I love you, but you're not Jim. Sorry, but you're just not Jim. Rolf nodded sadly. I expected this, Jenny. Sorry, but I had to ask. Should have gotten that out of the way. I smiled at him. He was so sweet. Jim doesn't want to talk to me, Rolf. He just doesn't want to. I don't know what to do. I don't understand how, if he loves me, he could cut me off like that. And I think you haven't realized yet how much you destroyed him, his whole world, girl, Rolf replied. But he just doesn't understand. It was only sex. It's just something that I need, excitement. It's like a dependency, without which I can't seem to exist. Constantly being with different men, not knowing who I'll end up in bed with next week. I just can't explain this to anyone. I poured out my feelings, explaining how even after I stopped it when I got married, within 6 months I was miserable with only one lover, no matter how wonderful he was and no matter how much I loved him. Just sex, right? Asked Rolf. Yes, it was never anything else, just sex. That smile you gave me. Those kisses that you gave me. The way you made me happy, was it all just sex? Asked Rolf. He didn't ask, he doubted whether I understood my feelings correctly. I thought about it. I remembered how it was with him. I remembered the feelings with which we made love, namely love, and not just sex. I was deceiving myself, and although with most men it was really just sex, an adventure in which I immersed myself and forgot, with Rolf and with some others, it was something more. Much bigger. Do you remember how you reacted when you found out that I was dating one of the other girls while you were on vacation, Jenny? Rolf asked softly, reminding me how angry I was. How I screamed and swore, how I sulked for several weeks. There was even harshness with poor Jim, who was completely innocent. Can you imagine how Jim must feel right now? Can you imagine how much worse this is for him? I looked up at Rolf, and the realization of what exactly I had done to Jim hit me. What unspeakable pain I caused him. I started crying, but this time I wasn't crying for myself. I cried for him, my husband, my love, and I cried like never before in my life. I was heartbroken that I had broken his heart. Rolf gently hugged me and rocked me gently while I sobbed like a child, clinging to him. I have no idea what I can do, but I'll try, he whispered to me. I just hope he thinks about you the same way I do. I will do everything, absolutely everything, to have even the slightest chance of bringing Jim back. I would struggle with my need to be with other men and prayed to God that I would have the strength to resist it, the willpower to say, no, I won't do this again. And I'll start right now. Yes, I'll start right now. I'll tell Rolf to stop unbuttoning my blouse. I will say I am determined to do this. I will tell him to stop immediately. Right now, I'm serious. Right now, right now. I'll tell him to stop. Rolf, please, I sobbed quietly, my feelings and needs fighting each other. Please, what? He answered, quietly, softly, almost like talking to a child. I trembled in his arms, whispering almost inaudibly. You know, you know. Then tell me, Jenny. Just say it. Please stop, Rolf, I finally managed to say. Please stop unbuttoning my blouse. I want you to continue. I need it, but please, Rolf, please. My body was trying to convince me to take my words back, and a burning desire was screaming at me for being such a fool. Rolf stopped and hugged me tightly, continuing to rock me gently. Sorry, Rolf. I'm so sorry. This is not because he put his finger to my lips, cutting off my stupid words. This is the first step, Jenny. How difficult was it? Rolf said after a few minutes. Complicated. Damn complicated, Rolf, I answered, and the tears that I had been holding back began to roll down my cheeks. I wanted you to continue. Damn it, I still want you to continue. But will you let me continue, Jenny? Because honestly, that's what I really want. No. No, I won't allow it, I answered, but I didn't believe myself. That is, I believed. But, oh damn, I no longer knew what I wanted. I pulled away from his embrace, jumped up from the sofa, and walked a few steps away, looking at him in agony. What are you doing to me, Rolf? Why are you torturing me like this? Why won't you leave me alone? This is the first step, Jenny, Rolf repeated, and a light step. It may not always be that easy, but it's a start. I understood what he was doing. From about the very beginning, I understood that he was testing me. He wanted to know if I had the willpower to say no, to refuse sex, just like that, knowing how wonderful it could be. I found myself choking, trying to calm my breathing, looking at Rolf and trying to get my thoughts in order. I knew that if he so much as nodded at me, I would return to his arms and rip off my blouse before he could stop me. Then he laughed a light, barely noticeable laugh, more of a smile than a laugh, and the tension disappeared. I felt my body relax, my breathing become even, and the storm in my head gradually subsided. How did you know? I whispered. How did you know what I was like? How many years have I known you? Rolf asked in response. How many years have I been in love with you? I smiled at him. Rolf always had the answer to everything, but could he help me with Jim? Then why didn't Jim know this? Why doesn't he understand me and my needs? Have you ever let him know? Rolf answered. Did he even have any reason to suspect anything? Would he have understood the truth if you had told it to him? You understand, Rolf, I answered plaintively. You listened long enough to understand. Rolf looked at me, almost like a father looking at his wayward daughter. But I knew I wasn't the only one, Jenny, he finally explained. Jim is your husband, and he had every right to believe that he was the only one. I began to cry again, realizing the magnitude of my desperate situation, but realizing that it was probably nothing compared to the situation in which my husband found himself. Rolf stood up and hugged me, not in the same way as before, but comforting me as several years of hidden grief poured out. I'll try to do something, Jenny, he repeated. I know someone who might be able to help. But as for Jim, I'm not sure, just not sure. Jim, when I flew out of the house without taking either my keys or my jacket, without thinking about anything except that my wonderful, sweet wife, the woman to whom I dedicated my thoughts, feelings, life turned out to be someone completely different. My consciousness was torn into pieces. Call girl, these words seemed to burn in my head, leaving charred marks. Jenny could call it whatever she wanted, soften the reality with words, but the essence remained the same. She was someone I no longer knew, and it tore me apart. I walked through the streets, not paying attention to the cold night wind, the deserted sidewalks, and the rare glances of passers-by. My body was moving, but my mind was in a blackout. I couldn't stop. I couldn't realize where I was and where I was going. Everything seems blurry, unreal, like a bad dream from which it was impossible to wake up. I woke up only on a park bench. It was early morning. The air was fresh but cold. It gave me a slight shiver. My head was throbbing with pain, as if someone was pounding me from the inside with a hammer. The afterglow of the whiskey he'd drunk in the pub was still on his tongue and buzzing in his ears. I didn't remember leaving that pub. I didn't remember how I ended up here, on this bench, in the middle of an empty park, where the first rays of dawn were slowly replacing the darkness of the night. I took my phone out of my pocket, as if out of habit. My fingers automatically began dialing the office number. Perhaps I wanted to get distracted, get into a routine, do something clear and concrete. But I froze, looking at the screen. It was only 6 in the morning. It's too early. And what will I say when I answer the call? What will I tell myself? It was all pointless. I put the phone back in my pocket and stared at the empty alley in front of me. The emptiness inside me was almost tangible, like a heavy weight hanging in my chest. I tried to understand what had happened, to understand how I now felt about Jenny. But nothing came of it. I couldn't hate her. It was strange, almost painful. I didn't feel angry towards her because I simply didn't know who she was now. The Jenny I loved and respected, it was as if she had evaporated, disappeared, leaving a stranger in her place. My head was spinning and my stomach was cramping, as if someone had squeezed it with an icy hand. I almost vomited from a wave of nausea. I closed my eyes, clenching my fists, trying to suppress this feeling, but it didn't help. All the memories of Jenny, how we met, how she laughed on our first date, how I fell in love with her, came one after another, but now these images were poisoned. I felt like something was being destroyed inside, piece by piece. Her innocence gave me her innocence. These words were confused in my brain in a chaotic whirlpool. Oh God, no, not this. Just no worse than this. She couldn't be. No, not when I first met her, not that first evening. Please, please, let this not be true. Memories of how we met flashed before my eyes. How she walked into the hotel and mistook me for the person she was supposed to meet. The man with whom she was going to negotiate a public relations deal for her agency. The agency she used to work for. The same agency where she works now. Oh no, someone told me this isn't true. How could I be so stupid? Why didn't I notice anything? But why should I? Why should it even occur to me to doubt what she was saying? Everything seemed so plausible, completely logical. But Jenny was a very smart woman. She would make everything seem convincing. And of course, I was blinded. Blinded by her beauty, and then, soon after, by his love. Love, love. What did that even mean now? A friend put me up for a few days, and in the office I said that Jenny and I had a big fight. I couldn't tell them the truth. How do you explain to someone that you just found out that you were married and in love with a woman who turned out to be a call girl who has been cheating on you this whole time? Jenny tried to contact me, of course. Sarah, my assistant, continued to tell me how upset she was and the state I was in. One day, she even suggested talking to Jenny, but I cut her off so abruptly that she never brought it up again. I called Jenny's parents to see if they knew about our problems. They didn't even suspect. I was going to tell them what their daughter does for a living to get back at her, but I couldn't hurt them that much. It wasn't their fault. They always treated me well, albeit a little distantly. I simply told them that we had had a little fight and that Jenny would no doubt contact them soon. Everything will be sorted out soon, Jim, her mother replied. If you only knew what George and I have been through over the years. If she knew what was happening with us, she would hardly have spoken so easily. I knew I had to see Jenny. I couldn't leave without knowing the answers to so many questions. But I didn't know how, and I wasn't sure if I could handle the meeting, so I continued to ignore her calls. Hi, Jim. You don't know me, you may not want to know me, but I would appreciate it if you would take the time to talk. I'll call you later. The man's voice had an American accent, but I often dealt with Americans. I was alarmed by the tone of his voice and the fact that he called me at home at a time when I was unlikely to be found. It had been several weeks since I learned the terrible truth, but the pain inside was still fresh. They say time heals, but in my case, it didn't even begin to heal the wound. When he called again in the evening, I answered and did not immediately hang up when I heard that he was calling on behalf of Jenny. He was smart. The desire to find out who it was played into his hands. I decided to listen to what he had to say. I thought it was the agency boss. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet with him. I assumed he was the agency boss and reluctantly agreed to meet him, not knowing if I could stop myself from punching him, but eager to find out what he had to say, to get proof if I ever needed it. He introduced himself as Rolf, but at first avoided explaining how he knew Jenny. When he realized that I wouldn't talk to him unless he was honest, he opened up, and what he said made me believe him. Why would anyone make up such a story? That he slept with your wife, did it before you, and that he paid her for it. I expected blinding rage, but it never came. I expected a scream, a blow, but none of this happened. Perhaps if he were younger, I would have reacted differently. But I just sat there and listened to him. Rolf turned out to be an intelligent man, accustomed to working with people and getting his way. Rich and powerful men like Rolf usually get what they want, but he had a peculiarity. He persuaded, not commanded. It was difficult to accept that I began to respect Rolf. How can you respect a man who slept with your wife behind your back for years? No, I couldn't love him, but I learned to respect him. His words made sense. No matter what happened, we both had to move on. I couldn't imagine taking Jenny back, but there was still unfinished business, and simply turning my back on it wouldn't solve anything. I agreed to meet with her, agreed to come to her house. My house, damn it. The next day, I pulled up to our house and parked my Jaguar in the driveway. It felt like a normal day, as if I had returned from work, maybe a little earlier. Even the neighbors, if they were watching, would not notice anything strange. Thank God for the car's automatic locking system. My hand was shaking so much that I could hardly insert the key into the lock. Fortunately, there was no such problem with the front door. It opened when I approached. I was prepared to push Jenny away if she tried to hug me, but she was smarter. She just stood there and let me in, quietly asking how I was feeling. "How the hell do you think I'm feeling?" I blurted out, despite the fact that I decided to remain calm. "Sorry, Jim," she said with a slight hesitation. "I don't pretend to know how you feel, but I can imagine." "How can you know?" I demanded an answer, but she just looked at me silently. "And don't you dare say that you love me or talk about this nonsense." I almost shouted, trying to provoke her, despite my best intentions. "I don't need to," was all she answered, without even raising her head to look at me. We went into the living room, my living room, and sat down opposite each other. "You wanted to talk. Then speak," I said briefly. I looked at her. Her face was empty, almost devoid of expression, life, hope. Then she looked up, and a slight shadow of a smile flashed across her face. I felt my heart break again. I couldn't shout at her. I could hate her. I could despise her, but I could not scream. "Do we have any chance, Jim?" Jenny finally asked. "Any chance?" "Hardly," I replied, "unless you convince me that your behavior was justified, and I don't see how you can do that." "I don't see it either, Jim. It was not justified at all. It was stupid and selfish. I had a problem. I have a problem, but I didn't even try to share it with you. I didn't even ask you to help me." She looked at me with a sad look and asked, "What do you want to know, Jim? I'll be honest with you, I promise." Where should I start? There is no point in simply asking why or when. "How did you get into this, Jenny? How could you?" I didn't finish the question. I thought it was already clear. Jenny took a deep breath and began. "I spent my childhood in a boarding school. I saw my parents only during the holidays. School was strict, and by the time I was 18, I hadn't even kissed a boy except my cousin in the summer. Then I went to Oxford, and it was like I was off the chain. Like many girls around me, I was crazy about sex, couldn't get enough of him. Once, at one of the rugby matches, my friend and I stripped naked and ran across the field. The players caught us, and we returned to the hostel only the next day in the evening, and even then in borrowed rugby t-shirts without anything under them. It was so crazy, exciting, and for the first time in my life, I felt needed, that I was worth something. I can't explain any more." Jenny continued her story, explaining how, due to lack of money, a desire for independence, and a craving for attention, she gradually slipped into the golden circle. She burst into tears, and I felt sorry for her, but I could no longer bring her back to myself. "And the evening when we met?" I asked when she calmed down a little. "I knew you'd ask about that," Jenny replied. "I couldn't believe that you didn't suspect anything. But we lived in different worlds." She looked at me again. "I guess you've never met agency girls before, have you?" I shook my head and Jenny shrugged, as if that explained everything. To me, this only confirmed what a fool I was. I had to meet with a client. American. There were always a lot of them, but I don't even remember his name. All I knew was that his name was James too. I was late, stuck in traffic, and met you, Jim. So why did you come with me, Jenny? Why didn't you leave? I liked you. You were cute. You looked different. Not at all like the men I knew then. What about the second date? I asked. Why did I get a second date? I really enjoyed that evening with you. You were so kind. I'm sorry, but you were kind of sweet and naive, even though you were 10 years older than me. I realized that you didn't even know why I was there then. And to be honest, I thought maybe you didn't have a lot of experience with women. But you quickly proved me wrong. But why this whole virginity thing, Jenny? Why did you do this? I was innocent that night, Jim. Maybe just yours, maybe not the real one. But that night I was innocent to you, and it was not an act. Or at least it didn't feel that way. So that means I was at least special to you, I asked. A small consolation, but still better than nothing. Very special, Jenny replied. The most special thing in my life. And then how did you continue to sleep with other men? How could you do this if I was so special? I didn't do it, Jim. At least not after our second date. You're lying, Jenny. Please don't lie to me. You continued to work at the agency until our marriage. How could you? Jenny shook her head with more confidence. I didn't do it, Jim. I swear. Yes, I went to dinners and got paid for it, but I didn't sleep with anyone else. Not with any of them. It was just dinners, maybe a couple of hours at the club, and then home. And the last time was 2 or 3 weeks before our wedding. Should I be impressed by this, Jenny? I asked sadly. Not really, she replied, shaking her head with uncertainty as the first tears of a new wave began to roll down her cheeks and a few strands of her dark, shiny hair clung to her wet face. Jenny didn't need me to ask the next question. She herself explained how, 6 months after the wedding, I suddenly became immersed in work, and she again had a feeling of insignificance, lack of purpose, and lack of life experiences. With my casual consent, she returned to the agency and started going to dinners again. No sex, just dinners with lonely businessmen bored away from home who needed a special companion for the evening. Paid for, but acting as if she came by choice. Of course, it didn't end there. Jenny got involved again, each time promising herself that it would only be once, then again and again. I thought I had the best of both worlds, Jim, she enthused. A wonderful, loving husband whom I adored. Still adores, she added defiantly, as if challenging me to argue with that. And that adrenaline of my second life, the glamour, the places where they took me, the way men looked at me with greed. And sex, I added coldly. Yes, Jim, and sex, she agreed weakly. How many of them were better than me in bed, Jenny? I didn't want to ask, but I had to. She started crying again. Not much, Jim. Honestly, not many of them. It wasn't the same at all. Yes, I got a little, attached to a few, but it was not at all like with you. Rolf, for example. Jenny nodded. Especially Rolf, she admitted. Until this moment, I could still succumb to the temptation to return her. I don't think it would work. Unlikely, but I could try. However, this confession destroyed everything, and the final questions buried the last hopes. How many of them have been with more than me, Jenny? The answer was a muttered, just a little. How many times did you come home and kiss me after the others? She didn't answer, only cried harder and whispered through her tears, Oh, I'm so sorry, Jim. I didn't need her words, her behavior said it all. She sat in front of me on the edge of the sofa, clasping her knees with her hands, as if trying to protect herself from the pain that was covering her head. Her shoulders shook slightly, as if under a cold wind, and tears flowed down her cheeks, breaking into the palms in which she tried to hide her face. I looked at her, feeling my heart literally being torn to pieces. Jenny, my Jenny. How could I love her so much, and at the same time feel like I couldn't be with her anymore? I couldn't hate her. No matter how hard I tried to find within myself this anger, this contempt, which perhaps could make my decision easier, I found nothing but love. Hell, I loved her even now, despite everything that had happened. I loved her so much that it hurt me. Looking at her in such a pitiful state, I wanted to hug her, console her, tell her that everything would be fine. But I couldn't. I just couldn't. We could no longer go back to what we had. It no longer existed. I took a deep breath, trying to cope with the lump that was choking me from the inside. The words came with difficulty. Each of them seemed to cut off a part of my soul. But I knew I had to say it. Jenny, I can't, I finally said, barely keeping my voice from shaking. I can't go back. I can't live with you anymore. If I had any doubts, they are gone now. Sorry. She raised her eyes to me, filled with tears and pain, and I felt the earth disappear from under my feet. But she didn't scream, didn't beg, didn't blame me. Instead, her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Do you think? Do you think that maybe someday? When will time heal wounds? Can we be together again? Her question took me by surprise. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to give her hope, but another part knew it would be a lie. I looked into her eyes, in which a small spark of hope still burned, and said the only thing I could honestly say. I don't know, Jenny. Maybe, but it seems to me that this will take a lifetime. She nodded, as if understanding everything, not expecting another answer. We both knew this was the end. But I couldn't leave without saying goodbye properly. I took a step forward and hugged her one last time. Her body was trembling, her tears soaked into my shirt like wet stains. I kissed her softly on the lips, putting everything I had ever felt for her into that kiss, and held her tightly to me, as if this could save both of us. Then I let her go. Very reluctantly, with a pain that cannot be described in words, I let go. Goodbye, Jenny, I said quietly, feeling my throat constrict with tears welling up. I left the house, trying not to turn around. Her quiet crying could be heard from behind, which pierced right through me. This sound stayed with me. It haunted me at night, reminding me of what I left behind. On bad days, when the loneliness became unbearable, her cry would sound in my head, forcing me to relive everything again. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, and the most painful thing. Jenny, I deserve it. Oh God, how I deserved this. But why is life so cruel to me? I spent the next week in a state of deep depression, and not even Rolf was there to comfort me. What could I do? Only what I knew. The only thing I knew how to do, and the thing that always brought me comfort in such moments. I called the Golden Circle Agency, and they were happy to hire me again, saying that I was their most popular employee. I'm not sure it helped me, but at least it didn't worsen my already damaged sense of confidence. I cleaned myself up, bought a new dress, and went to my first meeting, determined to enjoy the evening, because if this was going to be my life again, I intended to make the most of it and forget about everything else. My first choice was unsuccessful. I realized that it was better to choose one of the regular clients. He was a German industrialist who thought he owned everything in the world, including me. When we met in the hotel lobby, he gave me a lustful look and rudely remarked something about my breasts. My clients didn't usually behave this way, or perhaps I became more sensitive to what I was doing. He grabbed me by the waist and right there, in front of everyone, pulled the front of my dress down. I hastily pulled it back on, but half the hotel guests managed to enjoy the view of my naked breasts. I felt so humiliated. I thought about leaving, just turning around and walking away, but he held me tightly and was already quite drunk, clearly causing a scene. So I decided to get this over with as quickly as possible, insisting that we go straight to the elevator and go up to his room, foregoing dinner or at least drinks, which was usually the minimum requirement for a full evening of my time. He used me and finished me. I hated him. I hated everything connected with this profession. I decided to take revenge. I collected all his clothes, passport, wallet, every last thing, even a towel, and threw them out of the window without watching as they fell down. I ran out of the room in a torn dress, half naked, and rushed through the lobby, where dozens of people were looking at me. On the street, they whistled after me. When I got to the car, I drove home, crying. The next day, I took the plunge. I wrote out 4 checks for £180,000 and sent them to charities. The pharmacy was located next to the post office, which turned out to be very convenient, and soon I was home again. Looking at my favorite photo of Jim, I did this. I did not expect to go to heaven and was never sure of its existence. But that's exactly where it seemed I was. Everything around was white, foggy, and quiet. Finally, some peace. Jenny, Jenny, how are you feeling? The angels spoke to me. Why won't they leave me alone so I can sleep? Jenny, please try to hold on, fight. You can do it. Please leave me, I'm so tired. A few hours later, I returned to the real world, the same one that I was so desperately trying to leave. A man's voice nearby caught my attention. Jim! It was Jim who came back to me. But it wasn't Jim, it was Rolf, and it was he who saved my life. My neighbor called him, and if he had not come, I would have died. If he hadn't tried to get me to answer the knock on the door, I would have died. If he hadn't broken the door, I would have died. Jim didn't even come to see me, but at least he called, asked how I was, and even sent flowers. This finally confirmed that he and I no longer existed. A few weeks after my life with Jim fell apart, I found myself in New Hampshire with Rolf. He put me in a luxurious apartment that looked more like a penthouse from a Hollywood movie. High ceilings, huge windows overlooking the mountains, designer furniture. This was a place where I could start again. I think being Rolf's mistress was a definite step forward for me compared to my previous life. But even this status soon changed. Rolf was a man of action. He made a generous offer to Polly, his wife, and she, without hesitation, agreed to leave his life. It all happened quickly, almost casually, as if it was just another one of his business moves. When both our divorces were finalized, a year after we met, I became Mrs. Rolf Blackwell. This was a new chapter in my life, and I was ready for it. From the very beginning, I decided that I didn't want to be just a beautiful wife who sits at home and spends her husband's money. I knew that the local community would see me as just another trophy in Rolf's collection, but I was going to prove that I was worth more. First of all, I became actively involved in his business. I didn't just sit on the sidelines and watch things move. I delved into the details, took responsibility, and showed that I could be useful. 3 years later, my efforts paid off. Rolf made me vice president of his company, and at first I thought it was just a gesture of love and recognition. But he proudly announced at one of his dinners with colleagues that this decision was made by the board of directors in his absence. This moment was a triumph for me. I felt that I had achieved success not only as a wife, but also as a professional. I enjoyed it. Business became my passion, a new challenge that I accepted with enthusiasm. I loved the challenges, the stress, the negotiations, and the adrenaline that came with every big decision. Every victory, every successful deal brought me a sense of satisfaction that I had previously sought in the chaos of passions and relationships. Now the storm of passions with other men no longer mattered. I didn't need it anymore. My business completely satisfied one part of me, the part that strived for ambition, for success, for recognition. And Rolf satisfied the other. He was my husband, my partner, a man who loved me for who I am, without illusions or pretense. One day, the past came back to remind us of itself. One of the clients from my old days recognized me and tried to blackmail me into having sex with him again. I agreed, but at the last moment I couldn't go through with it. When I told Rolf about this, he was very calm about it. I never heard or saw this man again. There was also one of Rolf's colleagues who was my client quite regularly, which Rolf didn't even know about. This man was a little embarrassed in my presence until Rolf confirmed that he knew about my past. After that, he became one of my best friends. He and his wife are still close friends of mine, although I'm not sure if she knows about my past. I would like to believe that she would not care, but perhaps she would be surprised. And Jim? I had heard about him, but not from him, for several years. His business was growing at a tremendous pace, and I suspected that he concentrated all his energy on this, eliminating any romantic relationships from his life. Then I lost track of him, as my own affairs took up all my time. I took on more and more responsibilities in Rolf's business as he aged. Then my father died, and we went to the UK for the funeral and to sort out his affairs. His business has significantly increased our net worth. Now, I am a very rich woman. About 6 months ago, I heard about Jim again. It was a casual conversation with an old friend who mentioned his name, as if unaware of the resonance this news would cause in my soul. She said that Jim met a woman. She's in her mid-40s, lives in New York, and things seem to be going very well for them. I tried not to show that this information hurt me, but my heart sank for a moment. Jim, whom I always imagined as focused solely on work, finally decided to give himself a chance at new love. I imagined him smiling, holding this woman's hand, and for some reason this made me both slightly sad and strangely relieved. It was clear from her words that Jim was being careful. His past, especially our history, has left its mark on him, and now he tries to move slowly, without rushing, and I couldn't blame him for that. To be honest, I was glad that he found someone he could be happy with. Jim deserves it. I don't know what exactly made me think that they would succeed. Maybe it was his desire for stability, which was always part of his character. Maybe it's the way his new chosen one was described: mature, confident, perhaps capable of giving him that reliability and calmness that I could not give. Sometimes I find myself thinking about them, how they spend their time, what they talk about, how they laugh. I want to believe that he found his haven, his calm happiness, which he so deserved. I sincerely hope that everything works out for them. Jim is the man I once loved, and even though we have long since gone our separate ways, I only want the best for him. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think. Click to the next one. 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 Click to